Uh, Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, sir, Dr. Nageshwar Rao, sir, for that wonderful presentation. So, sir has mainly discussed the pathophysiology of the Kawasaki-like illness and um, toxic shock syndrome. I'm going to focus more on ICU management of the patients with multisystemic inflammatory response syndrome, or PMIRS as it's called. Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health has recently given a definition of this syndrome as any child who is presenting with persistent fever, inflammation in the form of neutropenia, elevated CRP, lymphopenia, and evidence of single or multiple organ dysfunction in the form of either shock or cardiac, respiratory, renal, gastrointestinal, or neurological disorders. For this diagnosis, the COVID-19 PCR may be positive or may not be positive. It is not mandatory. And as Dr. Nageshwar already showed in his case series in Italy, 3 patients were positive and 3 patients were actually negative. And in that case series, actually, there was 1 patient who was positive at the time of discharge, who was at the time of discharge was found to be positive, but at admission was negative. So this syndrome of multi-system involvement inflammation has got a clinical spectrum of Kawasaki disease-like presentation, the staphylococcal or streptococcal toxic shock syndrome, macrophage activation syndrome or secondary HLH, and a severe cytokine storm presenting as septic shock. So we'll first see what is this concept of cytokine release syndrome. From many studies now, from last 3-4 months, we have been saying it has been confirmed by the studies on clinical characteristics of COVID-19 and the mechanism of disease progression that cytokine storm plays a key role in rapid progress of COVID-19 disease, and IL-6 is one of the key cytokines involved in the infections which are induced cytokine storm. So the cytokine storm is identified clinically by persistent fever or a new onset of high-grade fever, reduction in at least 2 cell lines, so there can be anemia, thrombocytopenia, leukopenia, 2 of them in any combination, coagulopathy, deranged liver functions, worsening multi-organ dysfunction, which is measured by SOFA score in children, worsening vasotrope inotrope score, that is signifying the worsening hemodynamic status of the patient, and rising inflammatory markers, including procalcitonin level. Normally, we say procalcitonin level is a marker of bacterial infection, but during cytokine storm, the PCT can be increasing even in absence of bacterial infection, and of course, the increase in the serum ferritin levels and IL-6 levels. So if we study the cytokine storm over a timeline, we have this point A where there is an injury or infection. In our case, COVID-19, it can be dengue or any other infection also. And this stimulates the innate immunity, which leads to activation of humoral factors, particularly complements, which trigger the antigen presenting cells, which release the host of mediators, including pro-inflammatory mediators like IL-6, T1 necrosis factor alpha. In turn, these attract more and more antigen presenting cells and neutrophils. On the other side, there is also stimulation of adaptive immunity, which leads to release of anti-inflammatory response, mainly interleukin 10 and likes, and these are basically anti-inflammatory in their action. So in cytokine storm, in a typical cytokine storm, you have pro-inflammatory as well as anti-inflammatory response, and most of the patients, as we know, COVID-19 carries a good prognosis. In most of the cases, there is a balance achieved after 3-4 days between these two, pro and anti-inflammatory, and this leads the patient to path of recovery. So this is in most of the cases, but in some cases what happens in unfortunate patients, they go into hyper response and there is excessive release of the pro-inflammatory response leading to severe multi-organ dysfunction, early death, or the cytokine storm can continue along with increase in the anti-inflammatory response also, and this again leads to fulminant shock, multi-organ dysfunction and death. Or it can happen the reverse, where there is excess amount of anti-inflammatory response and there is very significant fall in the pro-inflammatory response leading to immune paralysis, leading to again opportunistic infections, septic shock and death. So this is the problem, and this is the main cause of multi-inflammatory response syndrome and various increase the mortality. Ferritin plays a very important role, as we all know now, and ferritin concentration studies have shown that if they are above 4,000, 5,000 nanograms per ml are associated with diagnosis of macrophage activation syndrome with 97% specificity with 98% negative predictive value. When ferritin is increasing, particularly more than 4,000, 5,000, it is associated with increased underlying pro-inflammatory as well as uh, anti-inflammatory cytokines. And the studies have shown that if the ferritin drops by 15% in first 48 hours, it can be taken as a surrogate finding for a favorable outcome. IL-6 levels are also now increasingly people are measuring. Many hospitals, including our hospital, is measuring interleukin 6 levels also. Normally, it is 0 to 7 picograms per ml if we do by CLI. And any threefold increase in the level of IL-6 level is considered as significant. The important thing about IL-6 is it can start rising within 2 to 3 hours of first injury or infection, and it has got a very short half-life. That's why it is considered very ideal for diagnostic and prognostication purposes. And what we have seen in our hospital also, that once there is a cytokine storm, we see IL-6 rising much early, right from few hours of admission. At that time, the ferritin actually may be normal, and then on day 2 and day 3, you will start ferritin start rising. So if you have a facility of checking both ferritin and IL-6, it will be better in the early stages relying on IL-6, and maybe subsequently at day 2, day 3 onwards, ferritin can be used, or IL-6 can be continued to use, because cost-wise, the tests cost the same, both of them. So the suggested approach for the initial management of multi-systemic inflammatory response by the RCPCH is that all the patients should be managed using all the personal protective precautions, even if the COVID-19 is negative, because they may come positive later on. Look for multisystemic involvement like liver functions, renal functions, neurological examination. ECG is very important, as Dr. Nagesh Rao pointed out, can show you the arrhythmias and myocardial ischemic injuries. 2D echo, serial echoes are very important to assess the ventricular functions. Troponin I, CPKMB for myocarditis. Uh, Cultures have to be sent, blood culture mainly, and then other cultures to find out any source of infection. IL-6, CRP, PCT, serum ferritin, D dimers, coagulation studies, all are important to monitor the cytokine storm. So we'll quickly discuss the management strategies one by one. First, going to the shock. The shock diagnosis is the same as what the surviving sepsis guideline has been recommending, is presence of hypotension, that is systolic blood pressure less than 5th centile or more than 2 standard deviation, or in presence of a normal blood pressure, 2 or 3 of the following, like altered mental status, tachycardia, bradycardia, tachypnea, prolonged capillary refill time, cold primary extremities, elevation of lactate, oliguria, hyper or hypothermia. The standard care is the same as the surviving sepsis guideline mentions for any shock, which is getting an IV access early. If you can't get an intraosseous line and start fluid boluses, vasopressors for hypotension, and antibiotic has to be administered within first 1 hour. Previously, the recommendation used to be 30 to 60 ml per kg of normal saline, and even going to 150 to 200 ml per kg of normal saline in first 1 or 2 hours. But now the studies are showing that excess amount of fluid is also not good. So the bolus, the quantity of the bolus has come down now to 10 to 20 ml per kg, and administer you can give around 20 to 30 ml per kg in first 1 hour, and after every bolus of 10 ml per kg, reassess for fluid responsiveness. Do not use hypotonic crystalloid starches, gelatins for resistation. Surviving sepsis guideline with a low quality evidence has recommended 5% albumin. So this is mainly when there is a lot of capillary leak and you have already finished giving 30 to 40 ml per kg saline, then you may try 5% albumin bolus of 10 ml per kg or 20 ml per kg. Although it will also leak, but it will leak slower as compared to normal saline. The perfusion targets are the mean arterial pressure above, as for the age appropriate targets, or above 65 millimeters of mercury. Urine output to be targeted between 0.5 to 1 ml per kg per hour. You need to watch the perfusion, capillary fill time, sensorium, and lactate. Vasopressors are indicated when there is a fluid refractory shock. So when you have finished giving 30-40 ml per kg of saline or 5% albumin with persistent poor perfusion, rising lactate, or when there is fluid responsiveness right from beginning, like a myocardial dysfunction or a patient coming to the unit with the fluid overload. The inotropes, usually initial inotrope in children is epinephrine, but norepinephrine can also be started depending upon situation. Dobutamine or milrinone inodilators are recommended for myocardial dysfunction. Stress dose of hydrocortisone also is used when there is catecholamine refractory shock, when the child is on already 2 inotropes with still persistent signs of shock. CRRT is very important in septic shock with multi-organ dysfunction to address issues of oliguric renal failure, fluid overload, dyslactatemia, and persistent metabolic acidosis. If there is severe refractory hypoxemia, it may require VV ECMO, and if there is severe cardiac dysfunction, then even VA ECMO. Tocilizumab is basically an IL-6 receptor inhibitor. It carries the risk of serious infections like neutropenia, thrombocytopenia, liver damage. The dosing is different at 30 kg cutoff weight, 12 mg per kg for below 30 kg, given as a infusion with saline at 50 ml of saline infusion. And if the weight is more than 30 kg, then 8 mg per kg in 100 ml saline infusion. Maximum is 800 mg. And if there is little or no clinical improvement after first dose, you can give 2 or up to 3 additional doses, keeping a gap of at least 8 hours between the previous dose and the next dose. This is tocilizumab is avoided in children less than 2 years, and it does not require dose adjustment for mild to moderate renal insufficiencies. Surviving Sepsis campaign has not given any clear recommendation in support of tocilizumab for COVID-19 patients as of now due to lack of evidence. Now coming to IV immunoglobulins, as of now, again, there is lack of robust evidence in support of role of corticosteroids, immunoglobulins, or tocilizumab. But we need to understand that COVID-19 is just a 4 or 5 months old disease, and lots of trials are underway, and we cannot rule out any modality which has got a sound scientific basis simply due to lack of evidence as of now. So IV methylprednisolone, IV immunoglobulins, plasma exchange, these are described as important treatment options for patients with cytokine release syndrome or cytokine storm. In one article by Ivan Carcillo and his team, this was one of the accepted mode. So we can extrapolate the same thing in the management of children with cytokine release syndrome because of COVID-19. Coming to role of steroids in the management of severe ARDS, because now the severe ARDS is also considered as a part of cytokine storm. And the most important reason why WHO was discouraging use of steroids was because of prolonged viral shedding which was observed if you give steroids. However, the studies have concluded that viral shedding is important only for epidemiological purposes, and there is no evidence linking the delayed viral clearance to worsening clinical outcome. In fact, dysregulated systemic inflammation or cytokine storm can kill COVID-19 patients. That's why, if required, steroids should be used. There are indeed randomized control trials underway right now, and we are eagerly waiting for the results of these well-designed control trials as of now. Jesus Villar and his team actually suggested use of corticosteroids for moderate to severe, not mild, but moderate to severe ARDS with signs of multisystemic inflammation in the form of fever, biocytopenia, worsening SOFA scores, or hemodynamic instability, DIC. And they have recommended using 1 mg per kg per day initially for first 15 days, and then 0.5 mg per kg per day from day 15 to day 21, and then 0.25 milligram per kg for next 5 days, and then 0.125. So these are basically a total 28 days program, where first 15 days you give 1 mg per kg and then taper for next 15 days. The clinical presentations of COVID-19 as Kawasaki's disease-like presentation already discussed with Dr. Nageshwar Rao, which is basically presenting with persistent fever, rash, conjunctivitis, peripheral edema, GI symptoms, and eventually progressing to vasoplegic fluid unresponsive shock. The therapy is as Kawasaki's protocol of IV IgG and aspirin, and children have responded to this. If there is a cardiogenic or vasoplegic shock, they may require intubation, ventilation, and vasopressors or anodilators. Now, there is one more entity called cardiovascular syndrome of COVID-19, which is basically a prominent myocarditis-like syndrome involving acute myocardial injury with very high troponin I's and CPKMBs with significant left ventricular dysfunction in absence of obstructive coronary artery disease. This can be complicated by cardiac arrhythmias and heart failure, and these are considered mainly late complications. So the studies which have come from UK have shown that they usually develop 2 to 4 weeks after apparent improvement. So the patient may have a COVID-19 and they may recover, and after 2 to 3 weeks of apparent recovery, they start showing these symptoms again because of cytokine storm. And therapeutic options are mainly supportive with fluid restriction, diuretics, and monitoring with troponin I, CPKMBs, 2D echos. Non-invasive or invasive ventilations may help because of positive pressure. It will reduce the left ventricular afterload, and the renal support is also important many times for management of dysregulatemia, fluid management. Very severe cases may require even VA echoes. very well conducted 2001 randomized control trial in pre-COVID area in 2001. In pre-COVID era, immunoglobulins were not shown to actually benefit myocarditis. And that is why we can again say that there's lack of high quality evidence and whether IVIGG should be used or not for myocarditis. But the studies now, the experts are suggesting 1 gram per kg on day 1 and 1 gram per kg on day 2 with IVIGG as a salvage therapy for fulminant myocarditis. So if there is a child is really toxic with high grade fever and shock, you can go ahead and start IVIGG. Coming to macrophage activation syndrome or secondary HLH, we all know how to diagnose HLH. The HLH criteria, famous 2004 and then revised in 2007, which says presence of fever, splenomegaly, bicytopenia, elevated triglycerides, evidence of hemophagocytosis in the bone marrow, and elevated ferritin levels. These are all to contribute to the diagnosis of HLH, as we know. And the HLH is of two types mainly: the familial or primary HLH and secondary HLH. The familial HLH is mainly a genetic condition, and most of the cases have a mutation in PRF1 gene which encodes for perforin. There will be history of consanguinity, and most of the times, and children will be less than 2 years of age. The secondary HLH is the main point of concern, but which we are discussing in COVID-19 or dengue. You can have, or in any other infections, you can have first infection which leads to continuous stimulation of toll-like receptors, and this leads to uncontrolled activation and expansion of T lymphocytes, macrophage, natural killer cells, leading to hypercytokainemia or excess amount of pro and anti-inflammatory cytokines. So when you have a situation like this, where there is persistent new onset fever with splenomegaly, bicytopenia, coagulopathy, DIC, liver dysfunction, you need to ask whether the age is less than 2 years, consanguinity, death of any family member because of prolonged febrile illness, or presentation with CNS involvement. If yes, then it is more favoring familial HLH. Then you need to get a bone marrow study done, genetic testing also, and try IVIG and steroid therapy. Involve hematologist early in these cases, and then if they are not responding to IVIG or steroids, then you can follow the HLH protocol. While if there is no risk factor for familial HLH, then treat them as secondary HLH with appropriate antibiotic source control, monitor with CRP, PCT, IL-6, ferritin levels, and IVIG and methylprednisolone can be given. 1 mg per kg per dose is usually sufficient. Some people say you can give up to 5 mg per kg, but we have seen 1 mg per kg per dose BD is also works wonderful for secondary HLHs. Now, to coming to the last aspect of treatment, which is heme adsorption therapies for cytokine release syndrome. From last 3-4 years, this is really picking up. So many publications and studies, so many case reports are coming showing the importance of heme adsorption therapies for removal of cytokines. So there are basically three methods for blood purification, which is filtration, dialysis, and adsorption. And adsorption is considered to be the most efficient way of removing the cytokines. When do you start hematobsorption? So a child who is actually landing in your ICU with high grade fever and with multi-organ dysfunction right in the first one day, first or second day, with high prism 3 in and high SOFA scores in first 12 to 24 hours, hemodynamically unstable with high vasotrope inotrope score, and then you resuscitated that child with IV fluids, antibiotics, source control, everything. And in spite of your adequate treatment, you still have persistent high fever, high inotropic requirements, high SOFA score, high procalcitonin levels, and rising IL-6 ferritin levels. Then you should consider using hematobsorption therapy for possible cytokine storm. These are basically for super sick children who are having multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. The various extracorporeal devices available to us are: one is toromycin, which is a polymyxin B coated, removes endotoxins as well as cytokines. Other is Oxiris, which removes endotoxins as well as cytokines, both pro and anti-inflammatory. And lastly, Cytosorb, which is the only C certified and approved in the European Union for removal of cytokines, removes both pro and anti-inflammatory. Although anti-inflammatory cytokine interleukin 10 is removed only 10 to 20% as compared to the other cytokines. It also removes bilirubin, lactate, ferritin, and even procalcitonin level. And this is important. All these hematsorbents remove procalcitonin level also. So procalcitonin level also. So when procalcitonin can be used to decide when to start hematsorption. Later on, subsequently, when you are using this hematsorption therapy, PCT itself, that molecule is removed by hematsorptions absorptions. That's why you may not be able to actually monitor the treatment by PCT subsequently once you start hemabsorption. This is how the cytokine filter looks like. It is attached in series with the CRRT filter, either before or after the filter can be attached. And timing of hemabsorption therapy is very important. So when should it be timed? So once again, going back to our timeline of the cytosol therapy, we can see that if you start your hemabsorption therapy in first 24 to 36 hours, you can catch the rise of pro and anti-inflammatory cytokines early and get them back to homeostasis early, leading to part 2 the recovery. So this is very important to start it in first 24 to 48 hours and arrest the excess of pro and anti-inflammatory cytokines. And if you don't do that, if you fail to do that and you allow the patient to be in cytokine storm for like 3-4 days and then decide, then by that time there is very high levels of pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines which are difficult to manage with this hemabsorption, and these cytokines will eventually lead to multi-organ dysfunction, immune paralysis, and death. The clinical response, as I said, will be difficult to monitor by only PCT because PCT molecule is also removed. So you need to look at clinically the decline of toxemia like fever, tachycardia, improving biocytopenia, improving multi-organ dysfunction score of SOFA score, improving hemodynamics by reduction in the VIS score, and finally, over a period of time on day 2, day 3, you can see even fall in the IL-6 levels and ferritin levels also. So when you start cycle, usually you give cytosol cycle for 6 to 8 hours every day, and it may be you may require to repeat it on day 2, day 3, up to day 4, day 5 also. So at present, again, once again, as the we have all been seeing already, there is lack of robust evidence for even hemabsorption therapy. Clinical trials, however, are underway. Two very important, well-designed clinical trials are actually underway, and we are eagerly waiting for their reports. So we can say that we can use hemabsorption therapies as a rescue therapy as of now, particularly if the patients are already on CRRT or ECMO, septic shock MODS patients, then definitely a trial of oxidase or cytosol can be given in such patients. But start in first 24 to 36 hours to have a good result. To summarize, the spectrum is large. The spectrum of Kawasaki, the streptococcal or staphylococcal toxic shock syndrome, acute cardiac syndrome, macrophage activation syndrome or secondary HLH, septic shock and MODS, and severe ERDS. But they all have one thing in common, which is cytokine storm, and we need to be very alert in identifying it early and tackling it early. Early identification of cytokine storm is also important, and you need to differentiate between various clinical spectrum because the management will change. If you are dealing with Kawasaki disease-like presentation, then IVIG aspirin. If you are dealing with myocardial syndrome, then you need to be more careful about management of cardiogenic shock. And if you're dealing with HLH, then you need to differentiate between is it familial or secondary. If you're dealing with streptococcal or staphylococcal toxic shock syndrome, then antibiotic is important, like ceftriaxone with clindamycin has been recommended by the British protocol. Role of steroids, IVIG, tocilizumab, plasmapheresis, hemabsorption, they all have a very sound scientific logic to back them. And several high quality clinical trials are underway right now, and we are waiting for their results too. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we'll take up the questions. So the first question is from Dr. Falgun regarding a case scenario which has been presented by Nageshwar Sen. So we want to know regarding the scenario 1, on which day of illness the second sample was taken.
Okay. So the physicians in USA, that is the first case from North America, they have taken with the gap of 3 days. I think the case report did not mention that, but in the original report showed that 3 to 4 days. Exact days I really don't remember, but within the 1 week they have repeated 2 samples. So first one became negative. So that's why it was diagnosed outrightly as Kawasaki disease, and gamma globulin given. Child improved very well. On the day of discharge, evening, the second report came from viral lab. That's a very important, and that viral laboratory is well reputed. Even that was mentioned in the report, and that is the reason they are actually thinking that COVID association with the Kawasaki-like illness.
Okay, sir. Regarding a second question from Dr. Pratik Shah. So, how to differentiate Kawasaki and COVID-induced myocarditis?
I think I covered that thing. Basically, COVID-induced myocarditis usually, not always, but usually will not have a coronary involvement as prominent as we see in Kawasaki. But again, in Kawasaki's severe Kawasaki-like illnesses, also when there is a coronary involvement, there is also an involvement of myocardium, as Dr. Nageshwar showed in his presentation.
So, and another question from again Dr. Pratik Shah. So, in one of the case series presented by Nageshwar sir, so all children in the Kawasaki received methylprednisolone. But what's your opinion on steroids and when to consider it?
I think I would prefer to give steroids in this particular any kind of some kind of information, whether it is a PAMS syndrome in the form of either you have pleural effusion, pericardial effusion, some amount of myocardial dysfunction. Probably we should consider methylprednisolone, like you saw in Italian group, where all cases are age is higher for the Kawasaki disease. Usually we see Kawasaki lesser than 4 years, but here little bit older. So whenever you see late presentation with the effusions and myocardial dysfunction, not like a toxic shock syndrome.
Yeah.
Toxic shock syndrome, I think you have to take case by case individual approach. Here, I think you have this kind of phenomena with elevated CRP, procalcitonin, and D-dimer and ferritin. Probably these are the cases I would definitely prefer to give methylprednisolone.
Okay, sir. The next question is from Dr. Srinivas Mini to Pradhan sir.
Yeah.
Sir, is there any evidence for COVID-19 virus less incidence in children?
Yes, that's what lots of studies are showing. First thing is, see, children can be silent carriers, but severity is definitely less in children. There's no doubt. Incidence we can't really comment because when they don't develop symptoms, they may not be tested also.
So at this point of time, less than 2.5% is the incidence in children, especially lesser than 14 years of age group. The estimated incidence in WHO bulletin is there. Every day they are putting it. Lesser than 19 years is lesser than 2.5%.
Yes, sir. But the problem is many children are asymptomatic, so they may not be screened also. They may not be tested.
Absolutely.
So, thank you, sir. The next question regarding the child, the adolescent boy which Nageshwar sir has presented with myocarditis, whether we could do a COVID testing, antibody testing in this child.
Yes, I think it's a good question actually. This particular child, we have been discussing every day that unfortunately, because of the government regulations, we are not fulfilling the criteria to have the second sample for the COVID testing. If you want to send for second sample, you have to have institutional guidelines and the institutional scientific committee to sign for that. So probably if child improves, we may get antibody titers at this point of time, which is not available anywhere to discuss also.
Okay, sir. The next question is from Dr. Sridevi Naini. Is there any role of rotational inotropic support in myocarditis?
Farhan, would you like to answer?
No, sir. You can.
So the inotropic support in toxic shock syndrome, you should be judicious and liberal. To begin with, noradrenaline should be given in most of the cases. Whereas myocarditis presenting with shock and hypotension, again a combination of inotropes should be given to improve the BP. If the shock is refractory, if the BP is refractory or non-responsiveness to the inotropes, then probably additional medication should be added. Like general principles in a myocarditis, we add calcium infusion or calcium sensitizers like levosimendan we add in case of refractory cases. I think more or less the same principles which we should follow in this particular setting. I don't think at this point of time we can differentiate whether it is COVID-related myocarditis, myocardial dysfunction and treat or not is not possible because number one, diagnostic problem. Number two, we don't have definitive therapeutic challenges at this point of time.
But I think the question was about rotation, whether we need to rotate the inotrope. I think that was the question. We don't do that actually when there is a shock.
Inotropic, if they develop a tachyphylaxis, probably you can change the inotropes, but most of the times this kind of situation, rotation very fast, which are not going to work out.
Definitely. First,
sorry.
What I was saying is in first 3-4 days in acute phase, we don't think about rotation. So maybe when the child is in prolonged cardiomyopathy, maybe on second week, this question arises. Then
second week, by the time tachyphylaxis and refractoriness, it's better to add another inotropes or other medications which we are suggesting.
Okay, sir. Regarding the next question to Naisha Rao, sir, is there any role of remdesivir and lopinavir in PIMS?
I have seen the literature, even that European registry, whatever it is presented, there is no role of antiviral agents actually. None of the patients received because there is no definitive evidence at this point of time. Even the trials which came in NEJM also did not support even during acute infection. I don't have much experience on that. We are only reviewing the literature. Probably whoever has reviewed this particular thing, they can also educate us.
Yeah, basically, these antiviral agents are used in the acute stage of COVID-19 infection, and cardiac features, cardiac syndrome, and Kawasaki disease-like illnesses are usually presenting after 2 to 3 weeks of the acute infection. So antiviral drugs will not be useful at that time. This is basically more of a cytokine storm. Maybe during the active COVID-19 infection, it will be useful. Like in active, a child coming with 4 or 5 days history of fever and then landing into ARDS, at that time you may use antiviral. Although the evidence is still not very strong, remdesivir is there, or lopinavir with the ritonavir combination is there in acute stage. But after 2 to 3 weeks of infection, when you are in cytokine storm and late complications of cardiomyopathy or myocarditis, it won't be much useful.
Yeah, I think the question is if you have COVID positive during PIMS, whether should we give antiviral or not is the question. But I think it's very difficult because the population itself is very small. They are presenting with a different presentation like toxic shock or myocarditis. I think it's very difficult to answer these questions, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Because the COVID-19 PCR can be positive for 28 days after the first infection.
Okay, sir. Regarding the next question to Dr. Farhan Sheikh, sir, from Dr. Amir Altaf. So, how frequently it is advised to repeat PCT, CRP, and ferritin levels post IVIG and steroids to monitor response? Is there any specific guide to target fall in levels to decide laboratory response or improvement?
See, if the child is in shock and you have started IV immunoglobulins and steroids on day 1, then definitely on day 2 and day 3 you will have to monitor PCT, IL-6 and ferritin level. If you don't have IL-6, then at least ferritin level. to see the response. As I showed also that there is one study which has shown that if your ferritin level falls by 15 to 20% in first 48 hours, it carries a good prognosis. So clinically, of course, you need to see fever, hemodynamic stability, and other things, but you need to also see in the laboratory wise IL-6 and ferritin and PCT.
But as a general principle, CRP levels will come down after 24 hours in most of these as soon as you give gamma globulin therapy.
Yes, yes.
Regarding the next question from Dr. Vasant Kumar to Farhan Sheikh sir. Regarding the maximum duration of the cytosorb filter, how long can be used in single session? And what is the tocilizumab protocol in respect to the IL-6 levels?
Yes, see, the problem with if you ask the company people, the cytosorb manufacturers, they say you can use for 24 hours. But we have used the cytosorb in 10 patients for dengue patients with cytokine storm last year. And we have discussed these things with the adult intensivist also. And there are studies now, recent studies, that the cytosorb filter gets saturated. It gets saturated usually between 8 to 12 hours. So and the problem is if you continue to use it, there is another problem that it may remove a lot of anti-inflammatory cytokines, and that can lead to excess amount of pro-inflammatory cytokines in the body. So generally we say that use it for 6 to 8 hours, then give a break of next 16 hours, then you can repeat your procalcitonin level or IL-6 level or ferritin level. And as I said, generally also you need to look at the child, and then depending upon the response you can give one more cycle of cytosorb. Adults, in adults ICU, they straight away give at least 3 to 5 cycles of cytosorb. In pediatrics, we have given some patients only one cycle and they responded, and some patients required 3 or 4 cycles also. So generally at an average you will require 2 to 3 cycles of cytosorb, each of around 8 hours, and monitor the patients. Tocilizumab also we have used, and usually you may require a second dose. Usually within first or second dose you will come to know when the fever is settling down and your inotrope requirement is coming down, liver functions are improving, then you know the patient is responding.
Okay, sir. Regarding next question to Dr. Nageswara Rao sir. Can we predict the occurrence of PIMS as it occurs usually 2 to 4 weeks later of the illness?
Sorry, what is that? Can we detect?
Yes, sir. Can we predict the occurrence of PIMS?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I think we have not really come across the situation at this point of time, because if you look at the graph of COVID positive cases in our country, the peak is just touching. The case reports came from either China, Italy, Spain, UK, and USA. They reached the peak of the bell-shaped curve. While falling down, that cases are PIMS cases are coming. That clearly shows that this is an inflammatory syndrome followed by the infection which is there in the community. So I think we are going to get these number of cases maybe in June 1st or 2nd week based on the amount of infectivity our society is going to get, our community is going to get. That is our prediction. So let us not label as Kawasaki or myocarditis toxic shock. The whole idea of reviewing this paper, this seminar is to identify these cases now, and looking for these cases in the near future is very important.
Okay, sir. So, regarding next question to Nageswara Rao sir, related to the same question, whether this antibody titers, whether they are IgM or IgG positive, as the illness is occurring 2 to 4 weeks later the primary illness.
Doesn't matter.
All patients they checked IgG. IgM you may not pick up also sometimes. IgG, we'll be happy to have IgG. So that gives an rough idea about herd immunity in this society.
But it won't matter because the pathophysiology is basically cytokine storm. It doesn't matter it is IgG or IgM. See, we need to understand that this multi-inflammatory response syndrome is basically cytokine storm, which we already are seeing from last 4-5 years in dengue. So what happens in dengue also, they are usually IgG positive after day 5, and the cytokine storm in dengue also classically happens between day 5 to day 10. So they come with the dengue fever, and initially they will only have capillary leaks, and then they respond, and then after day 5, day 6, they develop again second onset of fever. At that time, you will have IgG positive, ferritin starts rising. We see it every year nowadays. So it is basically the same thing in COVID-19 also. So it won't matter whether it is IgG or IgM, but we are seeing this myocardial syndrome and Kawasaki little very later, like after 2 to 3 weeks. In dengue, we see cytokine storm or secondary HLH right from third week, second or third week we start seeing. But this is unusual. In COVID-19, we are seeing it after 2 to 3 weeks. But essentially the thing is same, pathophysiology is same.
Now, that is the reason all the studies, they got the patients 2 to 4 weeks later of the COVID positivity or family history. Probably that's the reason in the studies they have mentioned IgG more common. I agree with Farhan, whatever he said.
Okay, sir. Regarding the next question from Dr. KK. So, as the time of occurrence of cytokine storm is different between dengue and COVID-19, is there any particular reason for this difference?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. No, in dengue, we see cytokine storm from between day 5 to day 10, either form of a very bad storm, multi-organ dysfunction, or just a secondary HLH. Many times it happens, they recover from dengue, we ship them to the ward, and then they get a second onset of fever. Gradually, liver enzymes start rising, and then we don't know what's happening. So this is usually the secondary HLH or macrophage activation syndrome. And sometimes we see they're directly going into very bad shock, which is the proper cytokine storm. In dengue, we see between 5 to 10 days. We don't know why in COVID-19 it is taking such a long time. But again, in COVID-19, the severe ARDS of COVID-19 is also manifestation of cytokine storm. The septic shock presentation of COVID-19 is also because of cytokine storm, which happens very early. It is usually between day 5 to day 10 in COVID-19 also. The myocardial involvement and Kawasaki disease-like presentation is late, actually. And at least I don't know why it is so late.
Can you open the microphones to some of the people who are seniors and all in the group? They can give their opinion as well, if it is possible and allows this platform. Otherwise, okay, you carry on with your next questions. We did not prepare for that.
Yes, sir. Regarding the next question to Nageshwar Rao, sir, is there any role of hydroxychloroquine in pediatric patients?
Yeah, it is actually mentioned in one of the Chinese group also they studied, but these group of patients who are presenting with myocarditis or ECG abnormalities, they are somewhat a high risk for this kind of chloroquine and all. So at this point of time, there are no guidelines either or experience to suggest or show that chloroquine has got a beneficial effect. So we are not going to recommend because we don't have answer for that. So I reviewed that. There's only one paper which is showing that equivocal results are there. So that's why it's a bit hesitant to speak on chloroquine at this point of time, this kind of PAMS syndrome.
Yeah, we are talking about PAMS syndrome, not COVID-19 infection, active infection.
So, thank you, sir. Regarding the next question to Dr. Farhan, sir, will there be any coagulation dysregulation in these patients? And is there any role of heparin or enoxaparin as they are used in the adult COVID patients?
Yes, yes. See, again, during an active COVID-19, lots of studies are showing there is a problem of coagulopathy, there is a problem of pulmonary vasoplasia and microthrombosis of the pulmonary blood vessels leading to VQ mismatch, and there is a role of enoxaparin. And the government hospitals in Pune, in Hyderabad, in Delhi, they are actually using enoxaparin for all adult COVID-19 patients. So if we have this kind of scenario in children, actually these things are actually not reported. But if we have, we will have to use enoxaparin. We will have to use hydroxychloroquine, because adult they are in active COVID-19. They are using hydroxychloroquine and enoxaparin.
Yeah. Here some of the cases we can give where you see superficial thrombophlebitis, or if you feel that a Kawasaki-like illness who has got a thrombotic potentiality, then it is recommended to give low molecular weight heparin also. So where you see coronary aneurysms or any evidence, it is recommended in some of the cases to give heparin. But again, it's going to be individual basis because there is no data available.
Okay, sir. Regarding the next question from Dr. Vivek B. In children with hyperferritinemia and bicytopenia, that is incomplete HLH or macrophage activation syndrome criteria, is it prudent to wait till other cytokine storm features?
Yes, see, only elevation of ferritin level is not an indication to immediately start the treatment. Many times, particularly during dengue season, we see this, that they may have some elevated ferritin level. Ferritin can be 50,000, ferritin level can be 70,000. But after day 5, day 6 of dengue, if your patient is improving, there is no new fever, only there is some biocytopenia and high ferritin, but child is clinically better, child is clinically improving, then just leave the child alone, just monitor the child. Maybe every alternate day you can check ferritin levels. If you have facility of IL-6, then you can check IL-6 also, and just monitor. Only when they develop a new onset high grade fever, there is a splenomegaly, there is a liver dysfunction, coagulopathy, plus there is hyperferritinemia, then it has to be treated. You're not going to treat hyperferritinemia, you're going to treat the symptoms. And ferritin level above 5,000-6,000 is considered to be surrogate of elevated cytokines in the body. But only ferritin is suppose 70, we have seen ferritins of 1 lakh also. But if the patient is clinically improving, you can simply wait and watch. If there is no fever and there are no other problems, the child's there's no multi-organ dysfunction, not requiring inotropes, clinically improving, you can just shift the child to the ward and observe.
Okay, sir. Regarding the next question, sir, is there to Dr. Farhan, sir, is there any need for drug dose adjustments while on cytosol therapy by Dr. Yashaswini?
Yes, there is a chart given by the Cytosop company. You can download from the internet. Some antibiotics are removed by Cytosop. Some antibiotics are not affected at all. So you need to go through that chart, and you may have to require. Ideally, any patient who's on ECMO or on CRRT or on Cytosop, we need to do a therapeutic drug level monitoring. That is most ideal, because the pharmacokinetics and dynamics are very, very variable in extracorporeal therapies. So it's very difficult to say. Some people automatically increase the dose of antibiotic because they can't monitor the drug level, but it is little dangerous. It can lead to organ injury. Ideally, we should do a therapeutic drug level monitoring when you are managing patients on CRRT or Cytosop or ECMO.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. These are the questions which we have taken up.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for your active participation. We could not see you and we could not see your questions as well. Probably next webinar, if we get opportunity, we'll try to make some other participants whether they can raise the questions and the microphone can be unmuted to them. Thank you everyone.
Thank you so much.